This lesson might seem like an interruption, an interlude. I do have many things that I want to talk to you about regarding rhetorical arrangement, but I offered a lesson to my face-to-face students yesterday, and I want to get it to you while it's still fresh in my mind. And it definitely does have to do with invention and arrangement, those first two houses that I've talked about so far. But the gist of it is this. I was driving up to Central Lakes College the other day, and it's an hour commute and gives me a lot of time to think. And one of the things I was wondering about is there a way that I can talk about plagiarism this year, which is something every Comp 1 and every Comp 2 teacher is obligated to talk about, in a way that's new. I've seen plagiarism all of my years as an English teacher. That's 25 years in a row. And I've seen degrees of it. Sometimes it's lightweight, sometimes it's egregious, it's just wholesale theft. And I was driving up also thinking about a student who I observed plagiarized in a research paper late last April in my Comp 2 class. Now there's some pretty whoop-ass language in my syllabus about plagiarism. And you know what? I try to live up to my syllabus. It's important, but when you're sitting down with a student who's about to graduate and get their 2-year AA degree, and there's some undocumented writing in the research paper, I just couldn't do it. And so I sat down with this young man and I said, "Sweet Prince, get thee to the drawing board. Let's go back to the drawing board, try this again, and let's document this properly." So this year, I want to try to talk about plagiarism in a new way. And it went okay yesterday in my classes up north at Central Lakes, and maybe it'll go okay here. And not only do I want to talk about plagiarism and the danger of plagiarism, but I want to talk about the idea that all artists naturally borrow, they beg, they borrow little bits of things to create new things. I've already talked to you about the idea that it's really impossible to come up, or almost impossible to come up with a thought that is completely original. People who want to be creative, people who want to be imaginative, like me and hopefully like you, we need models in the world to imitate. We take little bits and pieces, again, like I said, and we create new things. But what is some of the shades of difference between lightweight borrowing, honoring, acknowledging, and just ripping someone off, taking something that's theirs? I want to try to talk about today, and I want to try to do it in several ways. But let's start with physical property, okay? Now, if you were here, and you kind of are, if you were walking around with me, and you kind of have already, you would observe me saying things like, "That's my house. That's my house. This is my computer. These are my glasses." Just drop my pick. Crap. And so forth. This is my wife. These are my sons. That's my trusty F-250. This is my guitar.
Actually, Dad, that's my guitar.
Okay, this is my son's guitar. But generally most everything here is mine. Now that's physical property. That's something you could pick up and hold. Intellectual property is a little bit different. In fact, it's a lot of bit different. It's really different. And I'd like to try to talk to you about that today. Now let's start with some examples. Let's say I pick up a novel by Vladimir Nabokov called Lolita. All right? Let's just start with some clear examples. Everybody knows, you know, that if I pick that novel up, and by the way, I have the first page memorized, like weirdly I have the first pages of many novels memorized. If I pick that novel up and I pick up a pen and I start writing the novel down word for word with the intention of calling it mine, we know that's wrong. If I start writing Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lolita, the tip of the tongue takes a trip down the palate to stop at 3. Lolita. Did she have a precursor? Indeed she did. Many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea. She was Dorothy at school, Dolores on the dotted line, but dear reader, in my arms, she was always Lolita. Okay, if I publish that as a novel called Lolita by Jeff Johnson, that's called plagiarism. I word for word took an entire paragraph and started out a new novel with it. That's fraud. You can't do that, and I know you know that. But you could also look into that first page and say, "Hey, Vladimir Nabokov, what do you think you were doing by citing that line, many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea?" That is right out of Edgar Allan's poem, Annabel Lee. But he's Vladimir Nabokov, so he can sort of splice it into the first page of his novel and sort of give a nod to Edgar Allan Poe. Now later on in that first chapter, I don't steal the first page, but later on in that novel, there's an unbelievable sentence in the first chapter where the protagonist, the narrator, Humbert, that's his name, he says, "My mother died when I was very young. Parentheses, picnic, lightning." OMG, when I saw that at the age of 20, I love that so much. I thought, look what you just did. You didn't even stop the sentence, and in the middle of a parenthetical insertion, you told an entire story about a mother being wiped out and obliterated by lightning at a picnic. 2 words, giant story. So when I wrote my own memoir, for the only book I've ever written so far, there was a scene where I relayed, and I just showed this to my students the other day, where I was saved from drowning at the Coon Rapids Dam. So I'm writing a sentence a year and a half ago, and I blah, 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 and I was saved from drowning, and I put in a parenthetical insertion, and it went thusly. Fisherman, comma, daredevil. Just kind of riffing on Vladimir Nabokov, you know? I wanted to tell a whole story in one parenthesis. I'm thinking of when I eulogized my father 3 weeks back. I stood in front of 200 people, not an English major for miles except me, and I said into the microphone that many years ago, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. That is a sentence lifted from the first page of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. To pelt you with yet another example, I'm thinking of a graduation speech that I did years ago. In that speech at the beginning, I told a whole bunch of 8th graders in a hot gym that I had the hope, at that age, 26, that if I were good, God would permit me to serve the church by being a Catholic school teacher. Well, there I am, riffing again. That is a riff on the first page of Mark Twain's book, Life on the Mississippi, in which he admits that when he and his friends were young, they had the hope that if they were good, God would permit them to be pirates. Okay, and I hope you see the difference between grabbing a whole bunch of prose and just sort of, in a literary way, just acknowledging. Now, William Shakespeare, the greatest writer our species has ever produced, the end of beauty's line, did this too. Let's take a look at a couple of things Shakespeare did. In this passage, we see an unbelievably sad moment in King Lear. And we see this terribly sad character named Gloucester, who's about to be blinded, say this line. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Now look at that. Shakespeare's kind of going near the edge there. It's a beautiful line that makes us all feel tiny. But he borrowed that from Oedipus, written by Sophocles 20 centuries before that. That line was, flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. That's taken from Sophocles. He borrowed it. Let's look at another example where he goes over the line. In The Tempest, there's a character I love so much I'd hug him if he were real. His name is Good Gonzalo. And here in this passage, he's looking around at this fantastic island, seeing it as a kind of paradise. And he starts up this speech with these nasty guys kind of interrupt him with Renaissance kind of humor. He looks around and he says, had I plantation of this isle, my lord, and were governor on it, I would by contraries execute all traffic, right? And then we get this long list of all the things that he would not have on his, in his paradise, in his utopia. Guess what? Shakespeare didn't write those lines. That entire speech is lifted from Montaigne's essay of cannibals, or on cannibals, which was written 30, 40 years before Lear. Shakespeare liked it so much that he just sort of migrated it right into his play. Because in the Renaissance, they knew what the word plagiarism meant. To steal, that's what it is in Latin. But they didn't really have it conceptually in their head as something that you should not do. Now, let's go to some musical examples, and I'll try to bring this home to roost, and then hopefully I'll make the real points I'm trying to make here.